Okay, so chapter 4 is entitled cholinergic agonist. I-separate natin siya. We will have two chapters for the parasympathetic nervous system. We have chapter 4 sa mga agonist and chapter 5 for the antagonist. But nevertheless, under sila sa isa ka-umbrella, the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? So, what do you mean when you say cholinergic agonist? Diba, remember, nahuman na taog define what is an agonist. We have two requirements when you say agonist. The first one is affinity to the receptor, and then the second one is intrinsic
Intrinsic activity.
activity. Okay? So, when you say agonist, these are drugs that have affinity to the receptor. The names of the receptor for this is muscarinic and nicotinic. Mauna siya ang receptors ni acetylcholine. Kasi again, pag cholinergic, we are talking about acetylcholine. So before siya matawag og cholinergic agonist, kailangan pwede siya makabind sa mga receptors na gina-activate ni acetylcholine. And then we have two. This is very important na makabalo mo na kung unsa ang mga receptors ni acetylcholine. Again, we have the muscarinic and the nicotinic receptors. That's the first one. And then, aside from that, aside from binding, these drugs have to activate these two receptors. Pag na-activate na nila, then we can call these drugs cholinergic agonist. Cholinergic refers to acetylcholine. Okay? And then, we have the so-called cholinomimetic drugs. Okay? So, pag pwede po na to, ang cholinergic agonist actually, we can also call them cholinomimetic drugs. When you say cholinomimetic, cholino refers to the acetylcholine, and when you say mimetic, they mimic, ginagaya nila, ginasundog nila ang actions ni acetylcholine. So you either call them cholinergic agonist or you can call them cholinomimetic drugs. That's the same. Okay? That's the same. Ginagaya nila ang action or ang effect, activity ni acetylcholine. So let's talk about acetylcholine because this is the ligand. But when you say ligand, it's the original substance that will bind to the receptor. And for muscarinic and nicotinic receptor, our ligand is acetylcholine. Now, acetylcholine is endogenous in the body, meaning we can produce our own acetylcholine. It acts as a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger. And daghan kaayo og sites in the body where acetylcholine acts. So the first one is the preganglionic fibers terminating in the adrenal medulla. Wait lang. Saan akong tablet? So number one is this. Preganglionic fibers. So remember that you only have one neuron, diba? So this is long. Pero preganglionic, meaning before the ganglion. So bisan pag isa lang na siya ka neuron class, daghan na siya og murag what do you call that? Axons. Yan. And then ana siya daghan na terminal endings. Nagatulay-tulay na siya hangtod sa mga organ sa body. And isa sa wait. My laptop is low but wait lang ha. Okay, ulit. So, di ba, we have the preganglionic fiber or preganglionic neuron. So, meron yan siyang terminal ending na nag-i-end doon sa adrenal medulla. So, again, yesterday, na-mention ako si adrenal medulla. It's It's a gland located above the kidneys. So, naatay neuron ay naay ending, isa ka ending lang si preganglionic fiber nga mudiretso siya padulong dito sa atuang adrenal medulla. So this is an organ located right above the kidneys. And pag abot ana niya kay adrenal medulla, ang iyahang gina-release na neurotransmitter kay acetylcholine. So that's the first one. That's the first site where we can see our neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And then number two, the autonomic ganglia, both sa sympathetic and sa parasympathetic. So remember class, na if this is the what you call that, spinal cord, diba? Remember, if this is for the parasympathetic, and this is parasympathetic, and then this is sympathetic here. Remember that the junction here is called the ganglion. They're called autonomic ganglia. Pag plural siya, it's called ganglia. Remember, na-mention po na ako na at the end of the preganglionic neuron, at the ganglia, parehas ang chemical messengers both sa sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And that is the acetylcholine. Okay, so that's the second one. The second site where we can see our acetylcholine. And then another one, postganglionic fiber. Ayan, postganglionic fibers of the parasympathetic division. Okay, so di ba ingon ko dira magkalahi si sympathetic ug si parasympathetic. Because sa parasympathetic, at the end of the second neuron, it's still acetylcholine. So we call it postganglionic fiber of the parasympathetic division. Okay? However, sa sympathetic manggod, the major neurotransmitter here is norepinephrine. Kaya lang na-mention po na ako, class, na naay fiber si postganglionic neuron ni sympathetic nervous system na ang ending niya kay acetylcholine gihapon. So, mao na ni siya ang ikaapat. The postganglionic sympathetic division of the sweat glands. Okay? So, natay fiber sa atong sympathetic nervous system na mag-end dito sa ato ang sweat glands. Pero ang nag-govern nga neurotransmitter, ang nag-carry na message kay si acetylcholine. Okay? Pero pag pangutanon mo, major neurotransmitter of the sympathetic nervous system, it should be the norepinephrine. Naalang jud siya fiber going to the sweat glands na acetylcholine ang chemical messenger. And then the last site where we can see our acetylcholine is sa ato ang mga muscles. Pero this time, it's not sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, it's on the somatic nervous system. Remember, the somatic nervous system, it's the neurons where we can voluntarily control in the body. So ang neurons class ni somatic nervous system na nagakontrol sa muscles kay ang ilahang ginagamit na chemical messenger kay still acetylcholine. Okay? So, it's very important for you to know where we can see acetylcholine in the body. Questions class about the sites where we can locate our acetylcholine. As dapit dinhi ang wala na sabtan. We are moving na sa mga medyo complicated na things about pharmacology ha. So, you really have to listen at the same time you have to study afterwards. Ang pinaka-effective na way on how to retain this information sa inyong memory is to listen like today, and then in the morning or in the afternoon during class, and then in the evening you will read it again. It will be you will remember this information longer. Okay, so I hope you will read this if you have time later. Walay question about the sites. So let us continue. Okay, kani class, you really have to listen because this is a bit complicated ha for some, kasi ang atong istoryahan ani is how do we make our own acetylcholine. So from the raw materials until the end product, we have to know the steps how our neurons make acetylcholine. So we will be talking about neurotransmission at cholinergic neurons. We will talk about the synthesis of the acetylcholine, and then how do we store them, how do we release them, and where can we find their receptors, how do they bind to their receptors, and then afterwards, how do we get rid of acetylcholine in the body? How do we destroy acetylcholine? And the last one is actually recycling of the choline and the acetate. So kaning choline and acetate class mauni atong mga raw materials or mga precursors in making the acetylcholine. And we have to understand this figure. Okay? Because this figure summarizes the synthesis, the storage, release, binding to the receptors, and then degradation also, and the recycling of the choline and the acetate. Okay? So you have to listen. Kaya ako dyan ipa step by step sa inyo ha. And sa board exam, ginapa step by step kundi siya sa board exam. So sa choices, you have to arrange the process of making the acetylcholine. So ang paghimo kay acetylcholine is a bit easier compared to the process of the production of the norepinephrine. So, mas dali ni siya kaysa sa kay norepinephrine. Okay? Let's start. Okay. This is an axon, meaning a part of the neuron. Sa nerve ending, meaning neurotransmitter gyud siya kay ang naghimo sa iyahan neuron man. Take note of this, nerve terminal. Yinha na to ginahimo si acetylcholine. And ang pangalan sa neuron nga nagabuhat og acetylcholine kay ang tawag cholinergic neuron. Okay? Or neurons. Again, ang neuron na nagahimo sa atuang acetylcholine kay cholinergic neuron. Now, asa mag-start ang tanan? Dire. This is the first step here. Okay? So, before ma-produce si acetylcholine class, we need the raw material. We need the precursor, and that is the choline. So, choline class is an amino acid. Again, choline is an amino acid. It's a big molecule. So, definitely, it cannot pass through easily sa atuang cell membrane. Okay? So, dili pwede nga passive diffusion lang makasulod na dahil si choline. No. Choline is an amino acid. It's a big molecule. So, it needs a transporter before it can enter our nerve cells. So, sa transporter class, that's the CHT, the choline transporter. Again, CHT means choline transporter. And before it can transport the choline from outside the cell going inside, it needs the help of sodium. So as you can see, you have sodium there. This is also a board exam question. What ion helps choline to enter the cell? It's the sodium ion. I hope nakasunod sa first step sa himo sa acetylcholine. Do not look at hemicholinums first. Later na ta mag-istorya ng hemicholinums. Now, once si choline class it will enter the cell, it will actually bind with acetyl coenzyme A. Take note of this, ACCOA. It means acetyl coenzyme A. Pag si choline nakasulod sa cell or sa neuron, sa nerve cell, it will react or it will combine with acetyl coenzyme A. So it needs energy. Take note of this. Acetyl coenzyme A is a product. Oh no, no, it's a product, yeah, from pyruvate, 'di ba? When you do glycolysis, before siya mag-enter into Krebs cycle, it will be converted into acetyl coenzyme A. So pwede na siya dinha mabuo. Okay? And then um it's in the mitochondria. Yeah. And then we have acetyl coenzyme A plus choline class. That's the time mabuo si acetyl choline. But kailangan og enzyme para mag-combine jud ni silang duha and mabuo si acetyl choline. So this is part 2 here. And the enzyme is called CHAT. Again, the enzyme is called CHAT. That's an abbreviation. And CHAT means choline amino transferase. Again, choline amino transferase. That's the meaning of CHAT. Um, Again, this is the enzyme that helps the production of acetylcholine from acetyl coenzyme A and choline. Now, before class si acetylcholine ma-release and magamit nato, kailangan sa siya i-store. Kailangan siya i-store inside the vesicle. So this is the vesicle here. If you can see on your screen, you have a circular vesicle at the center. This is the vesicle. So this is now on the storage na part. Okay? This is now on the storage na part. Kailangan i-store si si acetylcholine inside the vesicle, and the one that stores the acetylcholine inside the vesicle is this one, the vat. Okay? So ang vat class, lahi na sa economics, lahi po na sa pharmacology. Si vat sa pharmacology is the wait, let me delete, it's not vesicular, it's vesicle, it's vesicular acetyl choline transporter. Again, the one that stores the acetylcholine inside the vesicle is the VAT, the vesicular acetylcholine transporter. So it will be stored inside the vesicle together with your ATP, that's our energy, and then the P. P is your proteoglycan. Okay? It's another molecule. However, we just need the acetylcholine here. Okay, after storing the acetylcholine, if we need the acetylcholine, then the next step will be the release of acetylcholine. So we are now on the fourth step and sa release na part. Now, how do we release the acetylcholine? Before the release class, kailangan ng help ni this one, calcium. So it's another board exam question because sodium will help choline to enter the cell sa first step sa production. But when you say release of the acetylcholine, the one that helps sa pag-release is the calcium. Kailangan class, there will be calcium influx before magkaroon ng release. When you say calcium influx, dapat musulod ang daghang calcium inside the cell. Remember, magpiso ka, magnesium, potassium in, sodium, calcium out. So calcium is actually found outside the cell, but for us to release the acetylcholine, kailangan musulod si calcium. Dapat na ay calcium influx. Now, once there is calcium influx, there will be a fusion. Ako siyang drawingan ha. fusion. Pag daghan na og calcium sa sulod, there will be fusion of the membrane and the vesicle. Again, if we have after calcium influx, the result will be the fusion of the membrane of the cell and the vesicle. After fusion, magdikit sila, magdugtong sila. After fusion class, there will be opening of the gates. Okay? Again, after fusion, there will be opening of the gates. May gate po na din ha kung asa mo gawas si acetylcholine together with the proteoglycan and the ATP. And ang pangalan sa atuang gates kay, we have here the two gates, the VAMPs and the SNAPs. However, these are also abbreviations, so we need to give the meaning for this abbreviation. Wait, I don't have space for me to write anymore. Okay. Wait lang. Sorry, let me pause the recording first. Okay, let's resume. Asa na ta? Meaning sa tuang VAMPs and SNAPs. VAMPs, yeah, small letter S, and then SNAPs. SNAPs. So these are the gates. This is the vesicle associated membrane proteins, and the other gate is the SNAPs. It's called synaptosome associated proteins. I hope you can read what I wrote sa screen. Again, we have the opening of the two gates, the VAMPs and the SNAPs. The VAMPs is the vesicle-associated membrane proteins, and the SNAPs is synaptosome associated, associated proteins. And kapag ka na-open na ang gates class, it's time for the release of the acetylcholine. Now, it's another board exam question. What is the process of releasing the acetylcholine? It's called exocytosis. Kabaliktaran ni endocytosis. Diba si endocytosis is engulfing of any material or any substance by the cell. But if it is called exocytosis, then from the inside of the cell, a substance will be released. And that's the process again of releasing our acetylcholine. Ayan, na-release na si acetylcholine. Once acetylcholine is released, then it is free to bind sa iyahang receptor. So, ang iyahang receptor is found post-synaptically. When you say post-synapse, ang itong space here, class, the junction between a nerve terminal, ayan, this is a nerve terminal, and a cell. So, pwede siya, any cell, somatic cell, as long as dili siya neuron, we call it synaptic cleft. Again, the junction between the nerve terminal, ang ending aning nerve, and another cell is called synaptic cleft or synapse. So, kani dinhi, kani nga part class, this is called a synapse. And our receptors para sa ato ang acetylcholine is found post-synaptically, meaning after the synapse. So again, di ba, we have two types of receptors for our acetylcholine. Both of them are found post-synaptically, and we have two. Again, what are the names of the two? We have the muscarinic receptors and the nicotinic receptors. So ang mga ma-release na acetylcholine will just bind to this, and once mag-bind sila, the receptors will be activated and magkaroon na og response or effect. Okay? Taas kayo no? Questions, class? Nasulod ba to tanan sa atuang huna-huna? Medyo...
Digest pa, ma'am.
Ansa?
Processing pa, ma'am.
Processing pa. I'll repeat it later. I'll repeat the process again later. Okay, but I will just finish the process before I'll repeat everything. Now, class, not all acetylcholine can actually bind to the receptors. This is how our body check and balance and maintain equilibrium. Hindi din pwede na we have too much acetylcholine and then mag-bind sila ang tanan sa receptor. No, our body cannot do that kasi magkakaroon ka ng sakit if you have a lot of acetylcholine. So to check and balance everything, we also have an enzyme. Ang iyahang role din is kontrabida. Once na ma-release si acetylcholine, ang trabaho jud niya kay gubaon niya ang na-release na acetylcholine. Para dili pud mo daghan pag maayo atong acetylcholine. Now that enzyme is this one. Ay, di na nun siya mabasa. Wait. Ayan. The enzyme is called acetylcholinesterase, or we abbreviate it as ganyan, ACE. Pero small letter H ha. Again, this is acetylcholinesterase. This is the enzyme that will destroy or will degrade the acetylcholine that is being released. Now, kapag si acetylcholine class gubaon ni acetylcholinesterase, the products will be this one. Kani silang duha, si choline o si acetate. Mao ni ang products sa pag-degrade ni acetylcholinesterase, and even kanang after na magamit ang acetylcholine sa mga receptor, mahimo na sila og choline o acetate. And that will be the time na pwede siya i-recycle. So we are down, this is the 5th ang pag-release, and this is the 6th here ang pagguba, and we are down with the recycling. Si choline na release because naguba si acetylcholine can actually be reused. Mubalik na siya dito and you can start the process again. Okay? So, ano lang, himuon, gubaon, ang uban kay mag-bind sa receptor para mag-act, and then si choline ma-release na pod, and then gamiton na pod si choline to start the process.
Ma'am, pila ka ATP ang kinahanglan, ana?
Pila ka ATP? Actually, dili tanang process din hinanginahanglan og ATP ha. This one, since this is a facilitated na diffusion, this does not require ATP here. Facilitated, you have a carrier. Wala siya nag-require og ATP. But this one, acetyl coenzyme A and choline, pag na sila, si acetyl coenzyme A, pag na-release, it needs ATP here. What else? The exocytosis also needs ATP. So, dili po siya ing ato kadaghan kung isa lang ato ang ginabuhat. But, naagihapon ang paggamit sa ATP sa process sa pagbuhat sa acetylcholine. Pero, wala na siya gina-question sa boards kung unsa kadaghan ng ATP na nagamit or na-produce during the process. So katong mga important things na ako ang gi-mention, mo to ang pirmi nila ginapangutana, and mao ni ang dapat na sabtan ninyo, especially if naamoy balak maging doctor or naamoy balak mag-discover og drugs, then kailangan nakabalo mo sa process. This is supposedly dapat na na lesson sa inyuhang anatomy and physiology kasi dapat supposedly pod magdiretso na ta sa drugs. Pero since I am not sure if it is covered in the anatomy and physiology, so I need to get back. Okay?
Na-cover man sa anatomy, ma'am, pero hapyaw ra.
Okay. Yes, there will be instances na masobraan ug degrade ang acetylcholine na na-release. And that will lead to conditions like cholinergic crisis wherein your body is having deficiency sa acetylcholine. Now, since acetylcholine is very important to muscular contraction, so pag ang tao nagkaroon og cholinergic crisis, wala na kusog ang iyahang mga muscles. So, pwede po na siya mahitabo. Okay? So, mo na siya nga, you have to stay healthy para dili kung si tawagan na mag-dysfunction ang ato ang mga neurons and atong mga cells inside the body. Unsay cause ana? Kapag kanili gani ma-explain ang cause, it will be idiosyncratic. Automatic lang imuhang lawas, mukalit siya og kadaot, and then pwede na siya mauwi into cholinergic crisis. Sa kapag kulang na kaayo ka og acetylcholine class, like naga-cholinergic crisis ka, even your eyes you cannot open it kasi remember when you open your eyes you need your muscles, and for your muscles to contract it also needs acetylcholine. So since if the person experiences cholinergic crisis mo na pati mata nimo dili nimo siya ma-open. That's how important acetylcholine is. But we don't also want na daghan pug kaayo tag acetylcholine in the body. So later, we will talk about the effects of acetylcholine. Ha? Ikompleto lang nako siya. Naatay mga drugs na nag-act on this process. Meaning, these are drugs na dili nato sila matawag og antagonist, dili pud sila agonist kay they don't bind to the receptor. Dili pud sila antagonist kasi again they also don't bind sa receptor ni acetylcholine. Instead, these drugs ang ilahang effect is on the process sa pag-produce ni acetylcholine. So the first drug here is this one. So, kung makita ninyo ning negative na sign dinhi, meaning these are substances that will inhibit the specific part in the process. So just like the hemicoliniums, this is the drug class that will inhibit choline from entering the cell. So when choline does not enter the cell, automatic tanan na nga process must stop. Kay wala imuhang raw material, wala imuhang precursor. Okay? Ang na-paralyze later, it's a different story. It's a different story. It's not about acetylcholine. Okay? It's on the brain. So, brain pag na-stroke. Okay? So, ang brain ang may problema din not really in the release of the acetylcholine. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2 drug, we have the negative sign here. It's the vesamicol. Okay? So si vesamicol naman, this will inhibit the VAT, the vesicular acetylcholine transporter. And pag i-inhibit niya na ang VAT, acetylcholine will not be stored. And if si acetylcholine cannot be stored inside the vesicle class, ang mga succeeding na mga steps, dili na po siya madayon, especially the release of the acetylcholine. It's very important na mag-exocytosis, ma-release si acetylcholine. Kaya wala man siya na-store because of the vesamicol, then we cannot release. We have made the acetylcholine here, pero dili siya ma-release. Useless gihapon if we take vesamicol. That's a drug that's the number 2 drugs. And the number 3 here, this one here, and you are very familiar with it, it's the botulinum toxin produced by Clostridium botulinum. Diba you are very familiar with this bacteria? Am I right? Na-mention siya sa inyong microbiome. Where can you find this botulinum toxin, class? Okay. As far as you can remember, where can we always find this bacteria, Clostridium botulinum? Sige daw, be, kung last sem lang mo nag-microbiome, no? I want to know. Isa pa inyo ma-remember aning Clostridium botulinum. Wait lang, I need higot sa buhok. Wala. Sure na gyud.
Mama, next question.
Ha? Asa makita si botulinum? Asa makita mostly si Clostridium botulinum?
Mga low oxygen condition area.
Low
Yan yung nagkakos ng botulism, ma'am?
Yeah, wala nagakos og botulism.
Ma'am, sa ano ma'am, sa beef?
Sa?
Sa beef?
Ah,
Toilet na
okay. Yeah, sa pagkain. Tama na siya. Dai.
Yung fish.
Fish ba? Fish?
Ay, cat food.
Ansa?
Canned food.
Oh, yun.
Canned food.
Sa canned food. So, you will know, class, na there will be a presence of the Clostridium botulinum sa canned foods kapag kamuburot na ang can. Dili na siya normal. Pag ang lata gani kay mo expand without opening honey, expand na ang lata.
Oh my God.
It
Ma'am,
means,
gikaon ba ito na, ma'am?
huwag ikaw ninyo. Ayaw ninyo kauna na,
Kung sa'yo mahitabo sa mo, ma'am, pagkaon ni.
kung may mahitabo sa inyo pag ikaw ninyo nang nag-expand
Oh
na
my
lata.
God.
Class, kanang expansion sa lata is an indication na contaminated na ang sulod. And it's not safe for eating anymore na ana siya bacteria. There will be food poisoning. Nakuha? So dili jud siya okay ang food poisoning. Aside sa diarrhea, ang problema natoan na if it is really because of the Clostridium botulinum, the person may experience botulism. And ang botulinum toxin manggod, once na ang bacteria man ang ni-release na no, and then maadto siya sa atong body because gi-ingest nato tong food, ang iya yung mechanism of action is i-inhibit niya ng opening ni vamps and ni snaps. Okay? Ni vamps and ni snaps. Daw, kung dili mag-open ang gates, automatically, dili pod ma-release atong acetylcholine and we will be depleted. Makulang ta og acetylcholine and it will lead to paralysis. It's different from the paralysis because of stroke, ha. This time, paralysis because of the inhibition of the toxin sa gates sa atuang nerve cells. And maparalyze kay mo mga muscles dili na siya manglihok. So kung dili po jud siya okay pero arang-arang na lang ang magdiarrhea kaysa sa mauwi siya into paralysis. So never consume a can that has already expanded kasi naana na siya presence of the bacteria inside. I hope that is clear. Okay?
Ma'am, what if gipainit pa na nimo, ma'am?
Remember that Clostridium species are one of one of the spore forming bacteria. 'Di ba sa inyuhang micro, naalang tay duha ka klaseng spore forming bacteria. The first one is Clostridium species. So tanan klaseng Clostridium, and the other one is the Bacillus species. Okay? So kani silang duha, if you subject them to an unfavorable na condition like during heating, they will not really die automatically. Si Clostridium and si Bacillus will just form spores. And these spores are actually alive but dormant. When you say dormant, they just don't divide. Wala lang sila naga-multiply, but they are alive. So ani ang kahadlok sa Clostridium ug sa Bacillus na mga bacteria. Mahimo lang sila og spore pero dili sila automatic mamatay. Nakuha? So bisan pa og giinit ninyo na class. Oh, and then Clostridium man siya, mahimo siya spore, mahimo lang na siya og dormant. Now pag class, pag kanang spore, ma-okay na ang iyahang environment, okay na iyang environment no, dili na siya init, mubalik na siya sa iyahang vegetative na form. When you say vegetative, katong alive na siya and dividing. Okay? So pwede na siya mudaghan. So, ayaw na ninyo ipilit ang canned goods na nag-expand na. Nakuha kay daghan pag klaseng canned goods. I mean, ang tinapa class kay, though mahal na siya karon pero affordable pa siya. Okay? Another thing that you have to take note of here is the Botox. Di ba you're familiar with the Botox, no? Kailan mag-Botox? Ba mga artista no nagapa-botox di lang nauso sa tuwa kay mahal man na, pero this is part of the cosmetics na industry na
Dili
inject sila og botox like si Kim Chu. Klaro kayo ang nawong ni Kim Chu na naga-botox, and ang pinakaklaro jud sa tanan kay si Vicky Bello, si Madam Auring, di ba sa una, and si Gretchen Barreto. Klaro kay na ilahang mga nawong na gida-injectionan og botox. Ang kanang gina-inject sa ilahang nawong, it's really the botulinum toxin na ginapahinay lang ang iyahang activity. Though naagihapon siya activity, pero ginapa-attenuate lang siya. Ginapahinay, then i-inject sa ilahang nawong. Now, since this is a botulinum toxin, ano lang na nila gi-abbreviate nila ang botulinum toxin, that's why they call it Botox. Botulinum toxin siya, the same ang iyahang mechanism of action. So sa mga nerve cells sa atuang nawong, it will inhibit the opening of the gates, acetylcholine will not be released, and it will induce paralysis of the muscles of the face. So ano na siya, gina-inject na nila para dili gani sila magka-wrinkles and bata sila tan-awon pero dili contract ilahang muscles. So kung tan-awon ninyo like si Vicky Bello or si Kim Chu, pag mo-smile na sila, yes, mag-smile sila pero ang ilahang lips lang na ang mag-smile. Dili pareha sa ato na when we smile, makita nato nga ang mga muscles sa ato ang nawong naga-contract, sa ilaha wala because they have paralysis of the muscles nila sa ilahang nawong because of the botox na ilahang ginapa-inject. Okay? Pero this is not cheap ha, it's expensive, and if I'm not mistaken, kapila sila magpa-inject sa isa ka tuig. Nagalapad ilahang nawong, wala dyan na naga-contract ang ilahang mga muscles sa nawong class, nagaana lang na siya. So para wala sila'y wrinkles. Sana all wala wrinkles. Pero dili na to gusto nga pag mo smile ka, kanilang ang nag-smile, imuhang lips, ang imuhang dire, wala na nag-smile, mga facial muscles. Questions, class? Wala, nasabtan to. Para may cheekbone everyday sa mukha eh.
Putol-putol ko, ma'am.
Yeah. Ano to?
Sabi sa Micol banda, ma'am ba?
Yeah, naman.
Dili, di ba mabutang sa vesicle ang acetylcholine?
Yeah, oo.
So magtapok lang ang acetylcholine sa neuron, maunsa ta na, ma'am?
Wala, kay dili man siya makabind sa iyang receptor. Pag dili siya makabind sa iyang receptor, wala na siya effect.
So magtapok lang siya dira, ma'am?
Yeah, and then eventually they will just kanang ma-degrade lang sila kadugayan kung wala dili sila magamit. Basta as long as wala yung receptor, dili ka maunsa. Kasi ang effect jud ani nila kay nakadepende sa ilahang receptor. So since wala siya naara siya diha sa nerve endings pero wala gyud siya na release, wala effect. Hemicolinium, Sarah, it is a drug that inhibits the entrance of choline sa cell. Kasi 'di ba si choline is an amino acid. It is supposedly found outside the cell. So kailangan siya makasulod para mabuo ang atoang acetylcholine. So pag nag-take ka og hemicholinum kana si choline dili na nakasulod. And wala na po, dili na pud ka makabuhat sa imuhang acetylcholine. Anything else? Wala. So ulito na to. Let's repeat the process again. I hope masundan ninyo ha. Let me draw. Do dili ko kabalo mag-draw, mura jud siya glubot sa babayi karon nga nagtalikod. But did you ko kabalo mag-draw anyway? That's it. It's a nerve ending. It's a nerve ending class. It's the nerve ending of a cholinergic neuron. So we will start here. Kailangan, the first step is for the raw material, the precursor called choline to enter the cell. So, muagi na siya diri sa choline transporter with the help of sodium. Okay? Now, once si choline kay makasulod sa cell, it will combine with acetyl coenzyme A. Again, si choline will combine with acetyl coenzyme A, and with the help of the chat, sorry, this is small letter H. Ayan, erase ko na lang. Hindi, na-erase na. Okay, with the help of the enzyme called chat or the choline amino transferase, acetylcholine will be produced. Now, pag ma-produce na si acetylcholine, ang next step will be the storage. I-store natin siya inside the vesicle using the transporter called vat. Okay? Ipasulod na to siya diri together with proteoglycan and the ATP. After the storage class, kailangan ma-release si acetylcholine, and before that happens, kailangan na ay calcium influx. Okay? Syempre, moagi sila diri kay calcium channel. So, pag naay calcium influx, there will be fusion, ayan, of the cell membrane and the vesicle. And once na mag-combine or mag-fuse together, si vesicle o si cell membrane gates will be opened. Excuse me. And then we have two gates. We have the snaps and the vamps. Mana ang pangalan sa atuang gates. Vamps is vesicle-associated membrane protein, and the snaps is the synaptosome-associated proteins. And then once na ma-open na sila, exocytosis will follow next. When you say exocytosis, that's the process of the release of acetylcholine from the inside of the cell. Igawas na to si acetylcholine. And pwede na siya, igawas ni siya diriha sa synaptic cleft. Okay? Pwede na siya mo-bind sa iyahang mga receptors na makita post-synapse. When you say post-synapse or post-synaptically, it's after the synaptic cleft. We have two types of receptors ni acetylcholine. We have the muscarinic receptor, and the other one is called the nicotinic receptor. Okay? So, pwede na siya diha mo-bind. And then some other acetylcholine that is released can be degraded by an enzyme called, let me change the color of my pen. The enzyme that will degrade acetylcholine is the acetylcholinesterase or the ACHE. Again, we call this acetylcholinesterase. And the ones na ma-degrade na niya si acetylcholine, ang products will be the choline and the acetate. So, pwede nato ni siya i-recycle si choline going back here para mag-produce siya again og acetylcholine. Okay? And then, we have drugs class. Sa itong mga drugs, the one that inhibits choline here is called the hemicholinums. Ayan. And then, for the VAT, This will be inhibited by the vesamicol. And the last one, the one that inhibits the opening of the gates, the snaps and the vamps, is the botulinum toxin. Again, we call this cholinergic neuron. Kaya?
Kaya pa man, ma'am.
Sige. So you really have to study ha. Studyhan yun ninyo para ma-master ninyo ang process sa pag-produce sa atuang acetylcholine. Together with the drugs that may inhibit the production of acetylcholine, production and release. Kasi si botulinum toxin is on the release of the acetylcholine. Questions before tayo mag-move on? Sabtan man to, no? Again, choline ha is an amino acid. So, mo na siya ato ang precursor. Okay, so let's talk about the receptors of our acetylcholine. The first receptor is called muscarinic receptor. Again, it's called muscarinic receptor. It's named after an alkaloid called muscarine, na makita na siya sa mushroom class. Though mushroom class is not a plant, but naa siya'y alkaloid. And we call it muscarine. And according to studies, that's why they call the receptor muscarinic receptor, because na the same ang iyahang effect with the muscarine. Pag ma-ingest na to si muscarine, pareha silang effect ni acetylcholine. So ang pangalan sa receptor kay muscarinic receptor. So I'm talking about the mushrooms that are not edible. Ang dili pwede kaunon na mushroom. Di ba na ay usahay no, mabalitaan na to ma-poison kay ni kaon og mushroom na dili edible, mao na siya ang cause ana ang muscarine, the alkaloid muscarine, and the effect is parehas kay acetylcholine. So later na ta mag-istorya unsa day ng effect ni acetylcholine na parehas og effect kay muscarine. Ang inyong tandaan lang class, the more colorful the mushroom is, the more poisonous it is. So dili mo mukhaon og colorful na mushroom ha. Like the Amanita phalloides, it's the name of the mushroom na kanang makita gud ninyo sa Alice in Wonderland, kanang colorful lang nga bilog-bilog. We call it Amanita phalloides. That's the scientific name. Wait. Sulat na nako. Ay, pangit ang color. Wait. It's called Amanita phalloides. This one is a poisonous mushroom na colorful. So, mag-release na siya og muscarine, and then the effect will be the acetylcholine. But the effect will be excessive. Excessive siya na it can be life-threatening. Now, another thing, if you are asked what is the classification of the muscarinic receptor, it's a class 2 receptor. So, bakit siya class 2? Because it is metabotropic, it is linked to a G protein. So, di ba, pag G protein, ang iyahang ma-activate, then class 2 siya, metabotropic na receptor. Now, we have 5 subtypes, natay 5 kaklase ng muscarinic receptors. And number lang na siya, M1, M2, until M5. However, only M1, 2, and 3 ang na-characterize na totally nabalaan na kung unsa ilahang function. So, the functions of the M4 and the M5 is yet to be studied. Okay? Tulo pa lang atong nabalaan so far. That's the muscarinic receptor. So, ang mga drugs class na nagabind ani nga receptor and naga-elicit og pharmacologic actions na parehas kay acetylcholine, we call it specifically as muscarinic agonist. Di ba we call them class, we call them cholinergic agonist or pwede po nato sila tawagon og cholinomimetics. Pero class, this is further divided into two, ang kaning atong mga cholinergic agonist ug cholinomimetics. The first one kay muscarinic agonist. Mao ni ang mga drugs nga specifically kay duha man atong receptor, nicotinic ug muscarinic. So mao ni ang mga drugs na specifically dito sila mo bind sa muscarinic receptor. So mas tama, do tama pud na tawagon silang cholinergic agonist, pero mas specific na tawagon na lang nato silang muscarinic agonist to differentiate those drugs na cholinergic agonist gihapon pero dito po sila nag-bind kay nicotinic receptor. Okay? I hope nakuha to. Questions? Wala. So how about the nicotinic receptor? So si nicotinic receptor naman can be found in the ganglion. Remember the ganglion? It's the junction between two neurons. At the same time, nicotinic receptors can be found in our skeletal muscles. So mo ni siyang naga-govern dito sa action ni acetylcholine sa atuang mga muscles. And it is named as nicotinic receptor because this receptor is being activated by low concentration sa nicotine. Gamay nga concentration sa nicotine, the nicotinic receptors will be activated. Pero ang inyuhang tandaan class, kapag taas na kaayo ang concentration ni nicotinic receptor, baliktad na ang action ni taas na kayo ang concentration ni nicotine, baliktad na iyang effect. It will be an antagonist to the nicotinic receptor. So again, for your information, the nicotine is both an agonist and antagonist to the nicotinic receptor. It is dose dependent. If it will become an agonist if low ang concentration and antagonist siya pag high ang concentration ni nicotine. Now, we have two types of nicotinic receptors unlike the muscarinic na naalang tay 5. Kani we have two, the NM and the NN. So NM, M means muscular, meaning we can find this type of nicotinic receptors sa mga neuromuscular junctions. And the NN, mao ni siya ang nicotinic receptors we can find in the CNS and other parts like the adrenal medulla right above the kidneys and the autonomic ganglia or the ganglions, okay? So the junction between two neurons. Questions about our receptors for the acetylcholine, nicotinic, and muscarinic? Nasabtan to? So basig mag-information overload. That's why I need you to study right after para ma-retain jud siya sa inyong utok. Akong problema kay hectic po din yung schedule tomorrow. We'll have the first thing in the morning we'll have the research and then you have the Q select and then the farm chem lab. Medyo lisod po. Muna siya ang hardest part sa pharmacy life. It's the third year life. Lisod ang mga subjects. Pero laban ra gyud. Okay? So, mag-istorya na ta og effect kay kagaina pa man ta sige istorya og acetylcholine, paano siya nabuo, unsa iyahang mga receptor. Now, kani ang effect ni acetylcholine. O ni sila ang mga effect. Once si acetylcholine mo bind sa iyahang receptor, the effects are this one. We abbreviate it or we have the mnemonics dumbbells. Kapag ka makabati gani mo og dumbbells, automatic it is acetylcholine. These are the cholinergic effects or we call it parasympathetic effects. Okay? Parasympathetic effects. Okay? Dumbbells. Okay? Wait lang ha. So when you say parasympathetic effects kasi, pag parasympathetic nervous system, ang tawag jud ato na ana sa iya kay rest and digest. Kay mao jud ni iyahang effect. Rest and digest. So kung tanawon ninyo, dumbbells, D means diarrhea, mutaas, mupaspas man gud ang motility if you have too much acetylcholine and then makabind siya sa iyahang receptor. At the same time, remember that atong mga sweat glands are also governed by acetylcholine, so there will be diaphoresis. Diaphoresis means excessive sweating. Okay? Excessive sweating na siya. And then there will be urination and then meiosis. Meiosis is pupil constriction. Again, pupil constriction ni siya. Siyempre, ang urination, di ko na siya i-explain. You know that very well. Bradycardia, it's low heart rate or baba na heart rate. It's less than 60. Yes, tama. Baba kaysa sa normal. And then you can experience bronchoconstriction sa parasympathetic na effect. And then emesis is vomiting. So ano siya ang effect ni emesis. And then we have lacrimation, the production of tears. Magluha-luha ka. And the last one is salivation. Now, that's the dumbbells. Maugid ni siya ang effect ni acetylcholine in the body. So again, we call it rest and digest, pero para mas dali, anything na basa, acetylcholine na siya. Remember, diarrhea is basa, urination is also basa. We have here emesis, mag-vomit ka, basa gihapon, lacrimation, and salivation. Mostly dun sa effect ni acetylcholine sa body kay basa. Nakuha?
Ma'am, ang atropine, ma'am, saan siya?
Atropine is an anticholinergic. Unsa ginamin sa anticholinergic. Baliktaron nimo ning dumbbells, we call it anticholinergic. So since atropine is an anticholinergic, diri na ang effect. Baliktad sa meiosis. Unsa baliktad sa meiosis? Meiosis is pupil constriction.
Dilate.
Okay.
Mag-dilate.
So si anticholinergic kay pupil dilation. Unsay tawag sa pupil dilation? Medical term. Unsa? Wala. Meiosis man lang sa pupil constriction. Ang sa ano? Baliktad ay Isabel. Midriasis. Midriasis. A ha A. Midriasis. That's pupil dilation. Okay? By the way, class, nakalimot ko og ano, wala na ako na-include kagahapon. Karon lang ako siya naalala na parasympathetic is rest and digest, while sympathetic governs our body, and then during the times when we are faced with emergency situation. So, ang sa sympathetic class nervous system, we also call this fight or flight. Mo ni siya ang sa sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. For example, na ay sunog. Diba that's an emergency situation, and the one that is very active during that kind of situation is the sympathetic nervous system. So you are faced whether to fight or to flight. Kana. And then once the sympathetic nervous system subsides, pag nag-subside na ganina, like nahuman na ang sunog, mag-subside na, it's where parasympathetic effects or the parasympathetic nervous system takes place. Okay? So mauna na siya ang time nga makahilak na ka, makaihi na ka. Actually, it's after. Dili na siya during the time that you are faced with a situation nga emergency, very stressed ka. Actually, during those time, uga na imuhang tutunlan. You cannot cry by that time, and you cannot urinate by that time. That during kanang naadjug ka sa tunga sa emergency situation. When that feeling subsides again, pag mahuman na si sympathetic nervous system, that's when parasympathetic nervous system comes in. And that is where makahilak na ka, wala na siya ang time. Parasympathetic effects na to siya. They, kanang wala ni sila nagasabay class kasi sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight while the para is rest and digest. Like kung example, naglaag ka and then kanang ano say tawag na ng naiiro kanang gukodon na jud ka sa iro, you have their sympathetic nervous system ang nagagovern sa imuhang lawas ana, and you are faced with the fight or flight situation. Whether to fight or to flight. Alam nga, mo fight ka sa iro, no?
Naaman
Ha?
Pakakonsad ni mong iro, ma'am.
Ano ba yung chance na mauna si, mahilak ka bago ka mag-fight or flight?
Ha? Muhilak ka?
Parasympathetic, ma'am, kaysa sympathetic.
mag-freeze lang siguro ka kanang mahadlok, bless.
Yeah, mag-freeze lang ka pero not na maghilak kasi the lacrimation takes place after pa the fight or flight situation. So pag mo come in na si parasympathetic na division or the nervous system, that's the time you cry. Okay?
Kanang gukdon bitaw sa iro, ma'am. Unya na nag-win ang fight, gigukod po niya ang iro.
So, kung ingana kasi mag-adrenaline rush ka man. So 'di ba sabi, ingon ako, adrenaline is epinephrine. It gives you strength. I don't know what kind of strength is that. And then pwede pa na siya mahitabo na win ang fight, then ikaw na mugukod sa iro sa mukha. Eh. You have the courage to do that.
Jud akong barkada, ma'am.
Ansa?
So sobra niya kahadlok kay gigukod mi sa iro sa Alabel pagod dati, ma'am. Nanglagot siya, kahadlok na siya niya, nidagan siya pabalik, gigukod niya ang iro. Kaya nidagan ng iro, ma'am.
Yo, mudagan po dyan ang iro kay mas isog naman ka kaysa sa iya ha. So, ang iro po, nag-face po to siya og sympathetic niya nga nga effect, nag-fight or flight po to siya, pero flight gito iya ha kay siya na may nidagan sa mukha.
Nidaog
siya?
fight.
Mudaog ang fight. So, atubangon nimo ang imuhang situation. Pero it's because of adrenaline ha. If you are faced with this situation, your body will release a lot of epinephrine. And then after the epinephrine, pag nag-subside na ang tanan, that is where acetylcholine will take place. And mauna na siya. Class, wala ka kakita og kanang nasunugan nga right there and then hilak. After pa na class mo hilak. After everything, after sa kalisang, that's the time mo hilak na makaihi na. Kasi pag moingon magukag epinephrine class, uga man guna siya, baliktad man guna silang duha. If basa ang effect ni acetylcholine, si epinephrine ug si norepinephrine, uga. Okay? I hope nasabtan ang effects ni acetylcholine. Yeah, like for example, pag maglinog, actually during the time nga first ni uyog, sympathetic nervous system dahil na siya, fight or flight. Pero kapag subside na gani ng daghan kaayong epinephrine in the body, that's where acetylcholine comes in. Makahilak na gyud ka sa kahadlok ana. After pa ha. Okay?
What if ka nang kuan, ma'am? Maski naa sa emergency, wala joy fight or flight.
Huh?
Maglinog, tindog ra jud siya.
No, tindog lang siya.
Actually, I have an experience with that, pero dili ako ha. Tung high school ko, kasi labangal man ko nag-high school. Tapos, there was a time na nanglaag mi, dira sa sapa, kanang sapa, diya sa labangal nga, nag-connect sa Silway, ug diri sa Padulong ug Solidad. Ninaog mi diha dyan mi ninaog, naglaag mi din ha. Pero before mi nakanaog, naabot mi saludin ato, basta kay gigukod man mi atog tunog. Gigukod mi og tunog kay nami kauban nga nag-inom-inom siya guys.
Sa jud, ma'am, nga daghan kay tunog.
Haon sa?
Sa saludin pa jud nga daghan kay tunog.
Yeah, so saludin mi ato, daghan tunog, nakasalubong na mo tong mga tunog ato niya. Among isa ka kauban nagainom siya ice water. Unya gipangayo sa tunog iyahang ice water niya. Una-una kay wala man siya kasabuton sa ginamin sa tunog, kanang nagduduha gud siya kung ihatag ba niya or dili. Unya kay nasuko na ang tunog, gipagawas na dayon niya ang kanang kutsilyo god. Basta kay paglingi nako ang kutsilyo dayon ang ako ang nakita. Unya perti na namong panagan. Unya katong nakadagan ako paglingi nako usab nakita nako ang kong isa ka friend mo to siya akong friend nga hinhin jud kay na siya di jud siya makabasag pinggan naglakaw ra siya ko ngano naglakaw ra man ni siya nga nangahadlok naming tanan so ing ato siya mag-react sa iyahang current situation nga emergency situation supposedly naglakaw ra siya ni balik gyud ko sa kong agi tas ako siyang gibira unya siguro kay grabe na ang adrenaline rush na fight or flight na god kay sympathetic nervous system na basta kay kanang pampang man na going sa kanang going down padulong sa sapa na nakanaog jud mi dinha nga wala ko kabalo paano nako ginaog tong murag pampang dinha that is fight or flight situation flight jud kahadlok kaya sa sa kutsilyo mo na laag pa more basta niabot mi og saludin tapos nakatabok mi atog sapa nga wa pud ko kasabot na paano mi nakatabok sa sapa after niya kay nagbulag-bulag na mi ato nagtawaganay na lang mi pagkahuman mo na siya ang high school life lagan para maka-experience og mga ingana na mga butang makaano ka mabutang ka sa fight or flight situation. Pero ang mga sweating, ang tanan kung naman mi kauban nga ni hilak after pa to katong nahuman na mig kanaog sa pampang. So nasubside na ang sympathetic nervous system naabot na siya sa parasimpa. Okay?
Ma'am, dira good sa flight, ma'am, kanang mudagan good ka sa emergency situation kay apil pud na dira nang sige gug kadagma.
Yeah, kay naman, grabe naman ang firing sa imuhang brain. I mean, sa imuhang mga neurotransmitters. Paspas na kaayo na siya. So, there will be times na magkaroon na og incoordination between your muscles. So, dili na coordinated ang imuhang mga movements. So, pwede na siya mag-experience, magsigig kadagma. Too much
Kanang
firing na.
murag
Okay?
bitaw paun sa bagdagan, ma'am, nagsige nagkadagma.
Yeah. So, effect gihapon na siya sa grabe nga pag-firing sa mga neurotransmitters. Active kaayo ang imuhang cells. Active magug kaayo pag moingon kag sympathetic nervous system. And sa parasimpa, that's where you rest and at the same time, digest. Okay? Questions pa? Wala na? So do not forget the effects of the parasimpaha kasi this one is more specific but if we want to summarize the effect of acetylcholine, tandaan lang yun ninyo ang dumbbells. Automatic, na siya, parasimpa or the effect of acetylcholine. So kung isa-isahon yun nato siya class, ang effects of acetylcholine sa each organs nato. So we have this sa mata, sa sphincter muscle of the iris mismo, there will be contraction. So pag mo contract na siya, it means mo constrict ang imuhang pupil. So there will be meiosis. But for the ciliary muscle of the eyes, mo contract po na siya para maka-accommodate og near vision. Now sa heart, since dili siya, appeal siya sa dumbbells, bradycardia. Siya, baliktad siya tanan sa heart. Negative tanan iyahang effect. Negative chronotropy, negative inotropy, and dromotropy. Unsay meaning ani nila? When you say chronotropy, it refers to the heart rate. So if it is negative, then muhinay ang heart rate or bradycardia. And then when you hear the word inotropic or inotropy, this refers to the force of contraction. It's the force of contraction of the heart. So since negative gihapon, muhinay ang contraction sa heart, ang force niya. And then negative dromotropy, hinay gihapon, pero this time when you say dromotropy, it refers to conductance of the heart. Remember, our heart beats through electricity. So, kailangan niya mag-conduct og electricity. Mahinay ang conductance of the heart. That is called dromotropy. So, hinay tanan. Pag you have too much acetylcholine, that's where your heart slows down. Okay, slows down about everything. The heart rate, the force of contraction, and even the conductance. Now, sa blood vessels, supposedly it's dilation. Mudako imuhang blood vessels, but in high doses, acetylcholine can cause constriction of the blood vessels. Okay? So duha ang iyang effect pero dose dependent. And then sa lungs, you will have bronchoconstriction sa bronchioles ito, and there will be bronchial glands stimulation. If the glands sa ato ang bronchioles will be stimulated, it means mag-produce siya daghang mucus. Musamot kag dili makaginhawa kay aside sa nagbronchoconstriction siya, nabarado na imuhang airways because of too much production of the mucus. However, for the gastrointestinal tract, baliktad kasi most of the effect ni acetylcholine is pampababa. Sa gastrointestinal tract siya pampataas mo ng rest and digest. Kasi acetylcholine will increase the movement of the gastrointestinal tract. We call it motility, and at the same time secretion sa gastric juice, sa mga pancreatic juice or intestinal na mga juices, mag-increase na tanan for acetylcholine. Okay? And then, for the urinary bladder, acetylcholine will cause contraction. Pag mo-contract si urinary bladder, syempre, ang ending ana, urination. Mo-open pa jud ang sphincter. Sphincter is the opening sa imuhang urinary bladder. So pag contract ana niya, ni-open ang imuhang sphincter, automatic there will be a release of the urine. So mo na siya, U for dumbbells is urination. And for the glands, tanan klaseng glands, may it be sweat glands, salivary glands, lacrimal glands, or nasopharyngeal glands, acetylcholine will stimulate the production of the mucus, of the tears, of the sweat, tanan. So basa when you say acetylcholine. So these are the parasympathetic effects or the cholinergic effects. Now, ang atong mga drugs na i-discuss na ginatawag og cholinomimetics, since mimetic means mimic, kaning tanan nga effects ni acetylcholine, pwede ni nila gayahon pag cholinergic agonist or cholinomimetics. Mo na itong mga effects sa both acetylcholine and cholinergic agonist. Okay? Questions about the effects ni acetylcholine? Wala. Can we start with the drugs? Let's talk about the mechanisms of action. Pag pharmacist ka, how dapat ka aning mechanism of action sa drugs? Like pangutanon ta mo, paano paano nag-cause og effect ang ing-ani nga drug? You have to answer that. Kasi supposedly we are drug experts. So dapat kabalutag unsay action ni drug sa tuang lawas. Now, we only have two mechanisms of action for the cholinomimetic drugs or mga cholinergic agonist. The first mechanism of action is mao ni sila ang ginatawag natog direct acting cholinomimetic drugs. Nganong gitawag sila direct acting? Kasi directly they will bind to the muscarinic and nicotinic receptors. And then once they bind to these receptors, they will cause activation of these receptors, and then after activation, there will be pharmacological or pharmacologic effect. And the pharmacologic effect again is called dumbbells kay cholinomimetic drugs man. Okay? So direct acting. Directly, they will bind to the receptors, muscarinic and nicotinic receptors, and mag-cause of activation of the receptors and then pharmacologic effect. Now, kung natin ginatawag og direct acting cholinomimetic drugs, we also have the so-called indirect acting drugs. Okay? Indirect acting because they don't have anything na ginahimo sa receptor. Wala sila nagabind either sa muscarinic or nicotinic receptor. Their action is on the acetylcholinesterase. So, di ba, na-remember ninyo, si acetylcholinesterase is the enzyme responsible para mag-destroy or i-degrade si acetylcholine. Now, kaning mga indirect acting drugs, what they will do is they will inhibit acetylcholine. So, inhibit ni nila si acetylcholine. Pag walay inhibit nila si acetylcholinesterase. Pag walay acetylcholinesterase class, wala po mo destroy kay acetylcholine. So, ang ending class mo daghan si acetylcholine. And pag daghan na si acetylcholine, pwede siya mo bind sa iyahang receptors. So, ang effect niya is still dumbbells, pero indirect acting na sila ng mga drugs because they don't bind automatically to the muscarinic and nicotinic receptors. Instead, kani ilahang i-inhibit. Si acetylcholinesterase na responsible in destroying the acetylcholine to choline and acetate or acetic acid. Parehas lang naha acetate or acetic acid. Okay? So, mo na siya again ang iyahang consequence kay wala na yung mag-destroy kay acetylcholine. You have more acetylcholine in the body and mudako ang chance nga makabind sila sa ilahang receptor, muscarinic and nicotinic. The ending, dumbbells gihapon. Nasabtan ang mechanisms of action sa ato ang cholinomimetic drugs. Questions, class? Wala. Okay. How about the others? Brown out no, na mga scheduled brown out. Okay, yun ya kay magsugod na gyud ta sa drugs. Let's talk about first sa direct acting cholinergic agonist. Again, pag direct acting, their mechanism of action is they bind directly to the receptors and then they activate the receptors, the muscarinic and the nicotinic receptors, and then afterwards they will elicit their pharmacologic response. So, naatay first group of drugs na direct acting cholinergic agonist, we call them endogenous choline esters. Sa meaning sa endogenous? Endogenous means we make them inside our body.
Kinabuhat sa akong body.
Yes, tama. Ginabuhat sa atuang body, ang body ang nag-produce. So, syempre, the first one is the acetylcholine mismo. Okay, it is a ligand, pero it's also a drug. An endogenous ligand or an endogenous drug na ang atuang neurons mismo ang nagahimo. So, dili na kailangan pangutanon ng FX class, automatic na siya, dumbbells. Okay? And then, na-mention man dito nung mag-decrease ang heart rate, even ang force of contraction, so mag-decrease po ang cardiac output, and even the blood pressure mag-decrease. Pero class, kung pangutanon ko ninyo, naabay acetylcholine nga mapalit sa market. Yes, naay acetylcholine na pwede mapalit sa market and ma-administer nato sa atuang patients, especially if the person is having difficulty in producing his or her own acetylcholine. We can give an outside source na acetylcholine class. Okay? And then another drug that is ang iyahang structure, this is not actually totally endogenous because betanicol is produced already in the laboratory, but its structure is patterned to that of the acetylcholine. Okay, this is an injectable. Ang acetylcholine imong ginay pangutana, injectable ato ang acetylcholine. But ang atong betanicol, carbachol na anti-oral ani nga drug. Okay? So si betanicol, that's the generic name. Again, this one is synthesized already in the laboratory. So ang tawag nato ani sa iyaha kay semi-synthetic because ang iyahang structure is actually pattern to that of the acetylcholine. So naalang sila gibag-o sa iyahang structure. I don't know if I have given the structure here. Yeah, this one. So this one is the structure of acetylcholine. You have to know the structure also because it might ma-appeal siya sa mga questions sa board exam. So we have acetylcholine here. This is the structure. Where is the botanical? Botanical is found sa pinakababa. Kanang naka-green nga part o naka-yellow na part, mauna siya ang gidagdag sa structure. So instead of the methyl group here, giilisan siya og amino na group, and sa carbon na ni kani nga carbon, gibutangan siya og substituent, and that is a methyl group, and mao na siya ang beta nicol. So pwede na siya i-take orally. So, unsay action ni botanical? Since its structure is patterned to acetylcholine, it's actually the same. Dumbbells, increased secretion. Sa GIT, more on sa GIT, there will be contraction of the gastrointestinal tract ng mga smooth muscles except for the blood vessels. We call it vascular smooth muscle pag blood vessels. So baliktad siya, mag-relax siya. And then there will be changes in the heart rate. Remember, B for dumbbells is bradycardia. Okay? Again ha, ang effect ni botanical, since pattern siya kay acetylcholine, dumbbells gihapon. Pero naani sila yung mga specific na mga conditions or diseases where we use these drugs. So for botanical, we use this for post-operative and neurogenic ileus and urinary retention. Pag sinabing post-operative, that's after operation, and then neurogenic ileus, it's uh, ano siya kanang because of the neurons, pero pag gingon nga ileus class, it's paralysis of the gastrointestinal tract. Remember, di ba, ang atuang gastrointestinal tract constantly naga-move na siya. We call it peristalsis. So kapag ka naa kay neurogenic ileus, a condition na there will be a damage sa atong mga neurons, and then pag post-operative kay after operation na paralyze ang gastrointestinal tract, kahinay, and then hangtod sa kanang dili siya mag-move, lisod na siya, pwede siya life-threatening. So, since ang ato ang mga cholinergic agonist kay ang effect niya dumbbells, so appeal na dito ang pag-increase ba diarrhea. When you say diarrhea, there will be increase in the motility. So, pwede siya gamiton for ileus. And at the same time, U for dumbbells is urination. So, we can give botanical to persons na kanang nalisdan mangihi. So, there is urinary retention. Okay? So let's talk about the side effects or the adverse effects. This is not actually side effect, it's adverse effect. Ang adverse effect ni botanical is just an extension of its effect. Di ba ang effect niya dumbbells? So ang iyahang adverse effect, pag masubraan ka, dose dependent siya, dumbbells gihapon. Pero take note, it's excessive dumbbells. Okay? Generalized na cholinergic stimulation, excessive dumbbells. So the patient will experience diarrhea, and then diaphoresis, or there will be sweating, and then excessive lang to nimo ang dumbbells, mao na to ang adverse effect ni botanical. Extension lang sa iyahang effect. Now, ang antidote for the adverse effect or even the poisoning of our botanical is atropine. Because again, na-mention kagaina kagipangutan naman ninyo, atropine is an anti-cholinergic. So kapag ka ang person yahang naga-experience siya og excessive na dumbbells, then we give an anti-cholinergic. Okay? Questions, class, about the botanical? Most of our drugs, class, ang ilahang adverse effect is just an extension of their effect. Kana ganing mahimo lang siyang excessive. So supposedly ipapaspas lang nimo ang iyahang motility, kay na ay paralysis, kay na siya ay post-operative ileus. Unya kay pag masubraan siya, instead na nag-increase lang ang motility, nauwi na siya into diarrhea. So ana lang ang mga adverse effects sa atuang drugs. Pag moingon kag extension of their effects. Okay? Questions? And then the next drug is called carbachol. So dali lang mabala no kung pattern sila kay acetylcholine kay ilang mga name na i-call, betanicol, carbachol. Ang kanang na-R mo na ilahang mga brand names, Carb Optic, Myostat, and Carbastat. So, ang iyahang action similar to that of the betanicol, syempre, dumbbells gihapon, pero ang iyahang condition, kung asa siya ginagamit is hindi na siya ginagamit for the ileus and the urinary retention. Carbachol is most likely exclusively used for glaucoma. So, carbachol is produced na ang iyahang dosage form is topical. So, ginabutang siya sa mata. Okay? So, this one is the carbachol here. Wala lang siya. Ang kaibahan lang nila ni betanicol, wala siya substituent ani nga carbon. So, kung nakita ninyo, kana lang siya. Ang kalahian lang niya kay acetylcholine, kay amino group instead of the methyl group. Again, without the substitution here. Are you familiar with glaucoma? Anyone here who is familiar with glaucoma? I will end here. Next meeting, we will have the direct acting muscarinic alkaloids or synthetics. Pero before that, mag-istorya sa taon sa ng glaucoma.
Nabulag mo.
Yeah, sa mata. It's a condition sa mata. Ang signs and symptoms sa glaucoma is the same thing sa naay nearsightedness and farsightedness na sakit. However, when you say glaucoma, mao ni siya ang ginatawag nato class og hypertension sa mata. Again, pag maingon ka glaucoma, it's almost similar to hypertension but it's on the eyes. Okay? So, wait lang. Remember class na ang hypertension, 'di ba, is on the blood, kailangan og pressure para mag-flow efficiently ang atuang blood. That's on the blood vessels. But for for the eyes, say tawag sa liquid nga naa sa atong mata. Di ba natay liquid nga naa sa mata? Kaya sa blood vessel, blood man. So ang sa mata, unsa? Natay fluid nga naga-circulate.
Lacrimal.
Ansa?
Lacrimal, ma'am.
Lacrimal fluid. Other name for that? We have the... Okay, tama. Isobel. It's vitreous. Vitreous na fluid na naa sa atuang mata. No, constantly naga-flow po na siya. So if this is your eyes here, you have your pupil here. Yan, yung pupil na dire. Diri na siya moagi class in between ang vitreous humor. To be exact, we call it vitreous humor. Now, para mag-flow ng fluid sa atuang mata class, kailangan po na siya og pressure. Now, if you have glaucoma, you have increased IOP. Ang tawag sa pressure, blood pressure man tong sa blood. Ang sa mata, we call it intraocular pressure. So, ang glaucoma gyud class, there is increased intraocular pressure and nagalisod ang imuhang vitreous humor na mag-flow. Okay? Now, unsay gamit ni carbachol ani? Remember, M for dumbbells is meiosis. This will cause pupil constriction. So pag mag-pupil constriction ka class, if this is your eyes, mugamay man imuhang pupil na sumuatras na siya. And what will happen to the kanang area for the flow of the vitreous humor? So look at this, mudako siya. And since mudako na siya, it will drop the intraocular pressure. So mo na siya again ang gamit ni carbachol. It's because of its meiotic effect. Miotic effect niya manang pwede siya sa glaucoma. Now again, what are the signs and symptoms of glaucoma? Kana gihapon hanap imuhang pananaw and sakit imong mata, murag matanggal imong mata sa kasakit kasi taas ang pressure. Okay? So it's common to older na mga na mga tao. Pwede din hereditary. Glaucoma can be hereditary. Mauna siya ang number one nga factor, genetics. Okay? So let us protect our eyes na dili mo taas ang pressure ana. So kung mag-rest gyud siya para dili mo taas. And mawi sa glaucoma, ang glaucoma is not kanang mukalit lang kag kabulag ha. This is progressive. So hinay-hinay na naghahanap imong pananaw kadugayan mawala na imuhang vision. Kaysa sobra nakataas sa intraocular pressure. And then again, it's very painful. Sakit imuhang mata, murag mahulog, murag matanggal sa kasakit. Okay? Questions, class? Wala? Ang sa glaucoma, if it's kaya pa siya itambalan sa mga drugs, then we give drugs. But pag dili na kaya kay severe na ang glaucoma, class, nag-require na siya og surgery sa mata. Gina-opera na siya sa mga ophthalmologist. Pero pag dili na gyud kaya kay mauwi gyud na siya sa blindness. Okay? Dito tayo mag-end sa kay carbachol. So next meeting, we will have the direct acting muscarinic alkaloids or synthetics and so on. Wala na questions or clarifications for the chapter 4. Next meeting, Monday, our quiz is the chapter 3, not the chapter 4 ha. Chapter 3 ta. Klaro na? Okay.